My name is Ryan Hale, and for most of my life I believe the things people say about small wins, that they're simple, quiet, almost invisible, like fixing a fence post or getting a stubborn engine to turn over, until one night a gate showed up across the one road that meant everything to me, and nothing about that night felt small anymore. I'd spent 3 years turning that patch of stubborn dirt into a little farm where I could breathe, where my hands could make something that mattered, and then some woman in a suit decided my access was a nuisance. And that was the moment everything I thought was private became public. I moved out to Willow Ridge because I wanted distance, not drama. But the truth about land is it doesn't care about your intentions, it only responds to what people believe they own. I learned, slowly, that there are rules, and then there are versions of the rules. There's the county map everyone trusts, and the meeting minutes that get drafted to fit the person reading them. I thought a permit and a county marker were enough to set me straight. I was wrong. 3 sentences in, and you should know the heart of it, I built a simple access road. I had paperwork, and the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association put a locked steel gate across that road overnight. That's the hook, because everything after that was spent clawing back not just dirt, but dignity. They called her Marjorie Blythe, and she smiled like the kind of person who practices forgiveness in front of mirrors. When she first walked up my driveway, I tried the polite thing, the neighborly thing. I introduced myself, offered coffee, listened to her concerns about community standards. She held a printed envelope like it was a scripture, and inside was a letter claiming the road encroaches on HOA property, and a deadline. I remember looking at her and thinking, this is ridiculous. She can't be serious. She was serious. There's a moment in fights like this where you decide whether to step down or to step up, and stepping up cost money, time, and sleep. I called a lawyer not because I love lawyers, but because someone had to read the fine print and tell me if my right to my land was a fact or a rumor. His name was Ellis Monroe, slow-talking, practical, the sort of guy who kept his shoelaces tied and his temper in a drawer. He read the deed. He read the county permit. Then he leaned back and said, "We can do this. But it's going to get messy." He was right. What you don't see in the footage people like is the slow, grinding escalation gate at midnight, anonymous letters on my truck, a letter to the local paper painting me as the outsider making trouble, neighbors avoiding my eyes at the post office. Marjorie and her board staged a little PR theater, and the cameras they trained on me felt colder than the steel of that gate. They had motives that reached beyond a fence. Willow Ridge had recently sold a chunk of land to a developer. Rumors of rezoning and profit floated like smoke through the HOA emails, and all I had was a gravel drive and the stubborn belief that the county right-of-way was a right, not a suggestion. There were smaller dramas inside the big one that mattered. A contractor named Luis who had lined up to finish the culvert work, but got cold feet after someone keyed his truck, and Iris, a woman from town who came by with soup and stayed, because sometimes the people who stand with you aren't the ones you expect. And then there was Vernon Hale, no relation, the retired surveyor who lived 3 doors down and kept more maps than television guides. Vernon called me one afternoon, voice like gravel, and said, "Kid, you need to look at my attic." In his attic was a yellowed survey with a stamp from decades ago showing a corridor that matched the county maps, a corridor Willow Ridge's board had conveniently drawn a thicker line over in the one meeting where everyone nodded and moved on. Discovery is what turns suspicion into something you can hold up: emails, minutes, receipts, a meeting where someone admitted on paper that they'd clarified boundaries for community security. Ellis served subpoenas like someone passing out invitations, and the more we dug, the more the neat little narrative Marjorie sold to the press frayed at the edges. There was a sale sooner than anyone admitted, a recorded change in map lines that only existed in the HOA binder and not in the county archives, and a list of residents who had suddenly become very vocal when checks started clearing for the developer. There's a scene I keep returning to in my head: the day I confronted Marjorie in front of a line of white folding chairs, where they'd set up what looked like a town meeting but smelled of strategy. She tapped the copy of the HOA covenant like a gavel and said, "We are protecting property values." I said, "You're blocking a road so someone can get richer." She smiled that slow smile and said, "You don't understand how these things work, Mr. Hale." My reply was softer than I wanted: "You don't understand how it feels to lose what you fought for." The chairs rustled. Somewhere a phone clicked on. At one point, the tension turned downright ugly. Someone spray painted my mailbox. Someone left a note threatening legal consequences that read more like a dare, and then a stranger stood at the gate one night with a flashlight and said he was authorized to keep people out. I stood up to him, words first, and he shoved a paper at me, an ugly, hastily drawn map with a notary stamp that didn't match any county records. He said, "If you move that equipment, we'll call the sheriff." There was an edge then, a look from the men in the SUV that said they would like me to disappear into paperwork and be done with it. I stared at the paper and felt something like fear, but I felt something stronger than knowledge that if you give your land away in silence, the people who profit will keep taking. The pushback from their side was disciplined, almost surgical. Chambers of polite outrage, carefully worded complaints, an email campaign that made me out to be an aggressive land grabber. My little social media posts, permits, timestamps, photos of the county markers were drowned in a louder narrative of community safety. I won't pretend it was easy to keep fighting. I spent nights at the kitchen table counting bank balances and deciding whether to mortgage my future on a past I believed to be mine. But then Vernon came forward, and with him came the proof we needed to change the tone of the story. Courtroom days are strange. They stretch, they condense, they make ordinary breath sound like a sworn testimony. Ellis brought in a parade of documents. Vernon testified with a steadiness that filed the edges off his years, and then we watched as emails that had been baked into community decisions revealed the taste of profit. The judge listened more than he spoke, and when the trustee for the developer fumbled over an answer about when the map redesign was approved, you could hear the air move in the gallery. There was a moment in the hearing when Marjorie took the stand, and something in her composure cracked, not because she'd been exposed, but because the person she'd built herself around had to look at the consequences. She said, quietly, "We thought it was better for the community." I looked at her, and the anger that had been burning in me softened into something more complicated, like pity edged with disappointment. I said, aloud, "Better for who?" It was not a rhetorical question. The judge did what judges are supposed to do when the facts line up. He declared the corridor public, ordered the gate removed, and awarded damages for the delay and interference. The gate came down in a scene that felt like a small victory, and a loud one people filmed. Neighbors came to watch like a community that had been asleep finally waking up. The developer's plan stalled. Charges were referred for further review, and for a moment the road felt like a patch of reclaimed dignity. And yet the ending isn't neat. There are consequences that linger, people with bruised reputations and checkbooks that won't lie down, and a community split along lines that no court can stitch up with a ruling. Iris stayed. We rebuilt the portion of the road that had been roughened by months of conflict, and I planted a small row of maples along the drive because I wanted something living to remember us by. Marjorie moved on. Some of her supporters moved on. Others left Willow Ridge for good. The developer's interest cooled but did not vanish. So why tell you this? Because in small towns and subdivisions and backyards across the country, there are fights that look bureaucratic on paper, but are about very human things: legacy, livelihood, the dignity of being able to walk up to your own door without a steel gate in front of you. I learned that standing up isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's expensive, lonely, and exhausting, but if you don't stand, the people who have more to gain from your silence will keep taking. If you've ever had to fight for a piece of land, or a right, or even just a little respect, tell me about it in the comments. Do you think the law did the right thing, or did the judge just scratch the surface? Who's right when community means profit for some and exile for others? Hit share if this story feels familiar, and drop a comment where we justified, or was I being stubborn? I want to hear your takes on justice, on powerful neighbors, and on what we should do when paperwork looks like truth but smells like something else.